All right, so tonight there's a couple things we want to cover, or there's a number of things we want to cover that are important topics as it relates to the idea and what you're working on. If you think about this as there's a cost of building a product, there's a cost of selling the product, and then there's the reasonable to exceptional profit that you're going to make. The more that it's exceptional, the more investors like it. The more that it's reasonable, the more investors won't like it. So as you look at the opportunity to grow your company, the question you need to ask yourself as you've done these customer interviews is, you can build it. So I'll give you an example, a real life example of somebody who came through a program a number of years ago, and their first idea wasn't really great, and they came back after a week and they're like, I've discovered a great idea. I'm like, what is it? And they're like, well, we're going to build a mobile app for organic farmers on Vashon to find other people they want to trade their produce with. I'm like, well, if you want to build an app, this is a good thing to build because you get to practice building an app. But from an economic perspective, that's a hobby. So the transaction value is super low. Your ability to take margin on that is super low. And the finite world of Vashon Island just isn't very big, right? So the question now that you need to ask yourself is, you can build it, but should you build it? So we're going to give you the data tonight to answer the question of should you build it. So business models in general, and I just want to walk you through and break down some of these components for you so that you all understand. What will happen is, as investors, is someone will come to us and say, oh, that's part of my business model. And what they really mean is, oh, that's part of my sales model, that's one of my marketing methods, it's a revenue model. But in general, when somebody says it's a business model, the definition of a business model is the way you create value, the way you deliver value, and the way you capture value. So a revenue model is a subcomponent of that. That's the how. The sales model is how you're going to sell it. The marketing method is how you're going to get people to know about it. But when you look at the business model as a whole, the business model is how you create value, how you deliver value, and how ultimately you capture value. If you don't create value, so our price is free, the answer is meh as an investor. Where if you create exceptional value and you're able to monetize that value, that's really what we're after. Can you both create the value, deliver that value to your market, and then capture the value? So that's context. So by contrast, here's how you don't make money. So small transaction values are bad. Small percentages are bad. Not being able to capture value. So you're like, well, we built it, but no one will pay for it. Okay, that's an indication, right, of value. Lumpy sales cycle, that's bad. So I had a friend who ran a company that they sold to school districts. Ed tech in general is super tough, education technology. The challenge they had to build a sales team to sell the product, but the only time you could sell the product was in August and September. So basically 2 months out of the year you could sell to that customer segment, and the rest of the year you're screwed. So you need salespeople for 2 months out of the year. Really hard to maintain a sales force when they get to make quota 2 months out of the year. So anything that's lumpy revenue, that's super challenging. Long sales cycles are bad. So early indication of success, if your sales cycle is 14 to 18 weeks, I'll do the back of the napkin for you right now. If your sales cycle is 14 weeks and you're at the end of September, how many new leads you're going to close between October 1st and the end of the year?
0.
Oh, you missed your year. So now your forecast is off. So time to close is a big component of that. So managing your timing matters. And ultimately pricing, and we'll talk about pricing at the end of the night, pricing is a little bit more art than science, but almost across the board, pricing, you will price your product too low because you know all the warts and you've grown up with your product and you know all the ugliness of your product. And the answer is your customer didn't see the last 3 revisions. They don't know, right? So, but you will price your product too low, and pricing it too low makes it really hard to go up. You can always come down. You can always promo. You can always discount. But once you've established the baseline of your price, it's super hard to come up. So we'll talk about pricing at the end. But those are quick ways how not to make money. So marketing starts at the top of the funnel. I'm going to walk you through a mechanic. You'll have this as an example. This is the same portion of the deck that I walk through every Techstars cohort. which is at the end of this 90 days with Techstars, you need to have some data about what marketing works and what converts. So I'm going to walk you through that mechanic tonight, but marketing is really just about finding the right customer. It starts with messaging and value proposition, the work you did last month, which is good. It starts with a strategy. Are we going to do outbound? Are we going to do inbound? And some of the stuff that we've talked about in previous sessions are, if you built a product that nobody knows what it is, then doing inbound marketing isn't going to work for you regardless of what HubSpot says. Because nobody is typing in a key phrase about what you're looking for in a search bar of Google. Now, if it's super competitive, you can buy keywords and you can buy traffic. But if you're building a completely new product that no one's ever heard of, inbound marketing won't work for you. You now have to do outbound marketing. Outbound marketing requires that you reach out and find those people and then get them to come back to the site. So in Boaz's case with Simply Augmented, it's how do we get that information out and have people go, I want a demo, right? So, and I'll probably just use you as an example as we go through the MQLs and SQLs tonight because it'll be good context. So I'm going to give you the key metrics and terms that you should know, and I'll be walking these through tonight as well. You're going to have a hypothesis, and what I mean by this is you're going to have a goal in mind of we need to create some marketing economics that we can track. It starts with customer acquisition cost, or CAC. How much does it cost me to acquire a customer? Now, if I'm buying keywords, I can track that pretty simply. If I'm doing trade shows and all my leads come through trade shows, then I have to take the fully burdened cost of that trade show, the booth, the travel, the headcount, and that becomes my cost, and then I divide it by the number of leads. Then I track the number of leads to the number of sales, which gives me my cost of customer acquisition for that lead attribution. Make sense at the simplest level? Okay, so we're going to walk you through that as a mechanic tonight just so you can understand it. But that's what happens a lot of times. People are like, well, I didn't really put my time in there. Okay, then you don't have a value, your CAC is wrong, right? Well, it's kind of like not including shipping cost, right? It's still a cost and you still need to account for it. Customer acquisition cost is one of the ones you need to, and you may be like, I don't really know yet. That's okay, make a guess, right? And then inform that decision every month as you add data to it. The second component is lifetime value. How much is this customer worth to me over their lifespan? Now, if you have data, you can go greater than 12 months. If you have no data, you should never, ever go greater than 12 months. Like, this is where Excel hurts you. Like, I saw a plan last week. It's a really interesting company. I like their product. I like everything it did. They finally got to the hockey stick slide. You guys know that one? Right? It's up and to the right. So quick data point for you. If I said, hey, I could tell you the number from 1 million to X million for Inc. 500 over the last 10 years to be in the top 5 of the Inc. 500 list for the last 10 years. Fill in the X. You have to go from 1 million to X millions. How many millions would you guess? It's a 5-year span, so you have to go from 1 million to how many millions over a 5-year span to be in the top 5 companies every year? 100 million? 200 million? 40 million? 50 million? 100 million? 42. So if your forecast shows going from 1 million to 350 million, I just know you have figured out Excel for the very first time. Right? This is like big red flag. Hey, I know how Excel works too. So if you go from $1 million to 42 million in 4 or 5 years, that's amazing. If you happen to be in the few that really cranked, Groupon was in one of those fews that really cranked. But to get from 1 million to 300 million, it's like this. As an investor, I just look at it and go, please don't hurt yourself with Excel. So lifetime value, if you calculate your lifetime value greater than 12 months when you don't have more than 12 months worth of data, the answer is you're wrong. So just be conservative, calculate it at 12 months. If you have real data and you have multi-year contracts, rockin', that's amazing. Average revenue per user. This is a time-based component. This could be annual contract value. This could be monthly recurring revenue. This has to do with how you bill your customers. Ultimately, we normalize that from a financing perspective. And if you do a 1-year contract where you're going to get cash up front, we love that because you need cash. And you're going to amortize that over the term of the contract. but you need to know what your annualized or actual revenue is and what the key metrics are, and we'll go through those tonight too. Churn. What percentage of people are going to leave you? 0 is not one of the options, right? You're like, we love all of our customers and they love us, and like, you're wrong. And when they come, and when somebody leaves and you're at a junior person and the senior person doesn't know you're there, you're not going to continue. So churn's fine, you just need to know what the number is. But if the number is really weird, it's going to be like, huh. And I could ask Javier, but I won't. How much churn do you see immediately after closing a deal? And the answer is amazingly a lot after we close the financing. Like, what the hell? And it happens almost every freaking time. It's weird. So I'm not suggesting anybody's hiding the ball. I'm just saying there's stuff around churn that you just want to make sure you're predictable about. Time to close. This is the big variable that most first-time founders don't think about. They're like, our customers love us. We're back to that 14-week thing. 14 weeks, no leads. By the end of September, you miss your year. You got to have time to close. Customer engagement. So you got them engaged, you sold them. How many times have they been on? So what I'm getting to is, what are your key metrics that you're going to measure? The key metrics are going to be relative to the revenue model that you pick. There's going to be a list of revenue models. The good news is you just have to pick one. And if you don't like it, you can pivot from it. It's fine, right? But the idea of these things are, these are just some things you need to know. You don't get to make up your own numbers. This is kind of like GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. You don't get to make up your own GAAP things. You're like, well, we track it this way. By the way, Groupon did that. We're like, we don't follow the traditional mechanics. We do it this way. And it's like, yeah, no, that's bad. So here's the mechanic that you're going to go through over the next 4 months. So today you're starting with a hypothesis. You will all get a copy of this. By the way, all the slides are on the link. You'll get an email with the slides tomorrow, an email to the Slack invitation tomorrow, all those things. But the basic mechanic I want you to work through over the next 4 months is this is a straight mechanic of some data. So at the top of your funnel, you have organic search, paid search, word of mouth, sales calls, PR, and the last one is my favorite, miracles. Or pixie dust, right? Which says, as a founder, I don't really freaking know, but it's going to be amazing. You can't forecast that. Right? And this is where Excel hurts you, because you're like, but it goes up and to the right. It's amazing. So those are called above the channel. Those are the channels you're going to use to get people to find out about you. So for some of you, it may be trade shows. For some of you, it's going to be, I have a list of people. For some of you, it's why we talked about in month 1 starting to build a list on MailChimp, so that you would have a list of people you could go market to. Like if you had a list of 5,000 people who expressed interest in your product today, that would be amazing. Which means today you have to start with 5, so the next month you can get to 45, so the following month you can get to 150. But you have to start building that, because no one's going to be like, I think your product's amazing. I would like to give you my list of 5,000 customers who have a predisposition to spend money on your product. It's not going to happen. So that would fall in the miracles category. Okay? Search engine marketing. So if you can do paid search, great. You can do Facebook ads, that's awesome, right? Search engine optimization and SEO is a total long tail strategy. So what you do today for SEO is going to help you next year. So like inbound marketing isn't going to help you make your end of year number. You need an outbound strategy to help you get your end of year number. Does it mean you should forego SEO? Absolutely not. You should definitely figure out what you want to do from a search perspective. But just recognize that things you do in search today aren't going to impact your quarter or probably this year. So again, no pixie dust allowed in your forecast. So whatever those things are at the top of your funnel, you're going to do what's called lead attribution back to each of those. Because what you're beginning to figure out is, I have these channels, they're going to create leads for me. These leads are going to convert at different rates. If you do what's called a blended rate, then you don't know where to put money. And the outcome of this is, the ideal outcome of this is, if I went to Brett and said, Brett, if I gave you $10,000 to invest in any one of these channels that you've elected today, how many days would it take for you to get an IRR, internal rate of return, on that $10,000? And if the answer is, it's 32 days, the answer is, tell me more. If the answer is, I don't really know, then the answer is, from an investor standpoint, You've just moved from risk capital to growth capital. If you don't know, it's risk capital. If you know something or have a hypothesis, and in the next 4 months you can put together your hypothesis, you move out of the risk category and into the growth category. The more you can de-risk the investment, the easier the investment is to get. The more you have data, the less it's a battle of your opinion versus my opinion. And the way you do that is you start to build out these funnels and timelines. MQL. MQL is a marketing qualified lead. A marketing qualified lead in its simplest form, and you can define all of yours yourself, but I'll give you the simple version of it. So in Boaz's case, if somebody, regardless of channel at the top of the funnel, if somebody fills out a form online and says, hey, I'm Dave, I'm interested in a demo, that is a marketing qualified lead. So marketing tools or marketing people or marketing effort have brought leads to your site and they've given you information that said, hey, I'm interested. If I bought a list, does that count? No, a list is up here. The answer is cold emails are bad. Good luck. Don't get blackballed. Because if you spam people from your MailChimp account, you will lose that IP address and it'll be bad. So don't do it. In spite of it's like, but you didn't understand it was easy until your email URL has been blacklisted. Getting it unblacklisted is an expensive proposition. It's better to change your company name. But people still do it. So we won't get into the components of spam here tonight, but for components-wise, and a marketing qualified lead is somebody who said, I am interested. I've given you information, email, name, phone number, whatever you qualify it as. The more rigorous you are about it gets you into being more disciplined to track your sales effort. You can use HubSpot. It's incredibly cheap because it's free for your marketing, right? And you get a certain number, they're going to say, hey, you have to pay for it. Great, you'll pay for it when you have the data. But getting a marketing qualified lead is, here's the form information, here's what I'm after. Then somebody in sales, likely you to start, will pick up the phone and say, hey, Ed, you wanted a demo, let's schedule a demo. Lots of calendaring tools, by the way. So Mixmax, there's lots of calendaring tools. Don't do this yourself. Like spend the $24 a month on a calendaring tool to have somebody just schedule it. It's amazingly efficient. You are then going to do what's called a sales qualified lead. Sales qualified lead uses a process called BATNA. So here's your acronym for it for the old sales folks in the room. The answer is it's never really changed. So budget, authority, timing, and need. So BATN, right? Do they have the budget? By the way, does anybody ever have a budget for a new product? No. But do they have a willingness to look at it? So the answer is, do you have the budget for it? If they're saying, yes, I want a demo, the answer is probably yes. When you get to big enterprise sales, you need to clarify who has the budget, right? Which goes to authority. So if you like this, are you the only person involved with the process and the sale? Authority. Timing. Is this a now purchase or a later purchase? And the last one is need, which ultimately, if you flip the acronym around, is probably more accurate, right? But it's easier to remember if you just start with BATNA. So your sales qualified lead then says, okay, we've identified when I talked with Brett, he is a qualified opportunity. Now, if you use Salesforce, if you use Pipedrive, I'm super tools agnostic. Like as long as you use a tool, you can use a Google Sheet for all I care at this point. There's different phases of opportunities if you have a non-transactional sale. So let me clarify what I mean by that. If you have a product that no one has ever seen before, you are in what's called an educational sales process. I'm going to have to educate you, educate you, educate you. If there's a product people have seen before, it's a transactional sales process. I can do a demo for Kevin. Kevin can say yes. He can put in his credit card number. He can buy over a form. But if you're in an educational sales process, the odds of you doing a one-call close are terminally close to zero. Because the answer is, I don't know you. I don't know the product. So there's a free use case of time-based free use if you're going to do that sort of sale where it's educational. Let them use it for 30 days. The challenge is freemium, by the way, is a marketing angle. Freemium is not a revenue model. Freemium only works in business to consumer, not early stage business to business. The reason is that when you ship your MVP, you don't have enough features to de-feature it anymore. right? If I take any more features out, I don't have a product, right? So to give you a freemium version of it means I have to de-feature it. So just take that out of your vernacular if you're business to business. How many of you are business to business? Okay. Rest of you are business to consumer? Oh, not sure? Both. Let's talk about both. Yeah, way to hit it down the middle of the fairway for me. No, you're not. So here's the deal. So when you're a startup, you're under everything. You're under-resourced, you're under-capitalized, you're understaffed, and you don't have enough ammo to go after both. So you have to pick one. I don't care which one you pick. My predisposition is business to business because I like predictable revenue and it's non-random, right? And I don't have to hit like a hit-driven business sort of stuff. So to me, it's a little bit easier to predict, but maybe you can, maybe you can't. But the whole idea of being, and we'll talk about it as we talk about the revenue models, there's 16 revenue models. Some of them are freakishly hard. Like advertising requires you have 1 million unique visitors every month. So yes, it will work for you at scale, but you will die on your way to making it work. B to B to C is another definition of a slow death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Because you're like, well, ultimately the user is, no, just nail it down today and say, we're either B2B or we're B2C and this is how we're launching, right? So you get into complex models like Facebook, and we'll talk about that as well, where it's like when you are the product, when the consumer is the product, advertising is the model, right? So the way Facebook makes money is advertising because you're the product. So I want to get access to your eyeballs. So that's what I'm going to start with. Now, it only works because in the new media model, I'll tell you what makes it work. So if you are going after that one, rockin'. If you hit the K factor, I definitely want to write a check. Most people don't, so it makes it pretty easy to predict. So you've got marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, and customers. Every month you're going to look at what is my spend. Month one, what's my conversion between these two MQLs? How many MQLs am I getting on a monthly basis? Is it 1? Is it 14? Is it 27? Of those, how many convert to sales qualified leads? Of the sales qualified leads, what percentage convert to customers? That gets me my monthly recurring revenue, and it gets me time. So now you're at the focus of your dashboard is, okay, I'm going from 18 weeks to 8 weeks. That's super interesting. So as an investor, let me tell you where it's super exciting for us. When your time to close is going down, the top of your funnel leads is going up, and your annual contract value is going up. So customers are paying for a year's worth of service in advance instead of a month's worth of service in advance. I'm super interested because it means you've figured out any number of those levers, and those are the levers you have to pull. So let's say we're the September example again. If you don't have enough leads at the top of your funnel, in order to make your year-end numbers, you either have to increase your price, right? Because now you don't have enough leads and your time to close is running out of time. You have to decrease the time to close, increase your price, or increase the top of the funnel. You've already timed out on the top of the funnel, right? So all you got left now is I got to jam folks into, I have to hope and wish that they're going to close faster. Not likely based on the data, right? So what you're after is I want to know that they're going to close. So this you're going to fill out over the next 4 months. So it's going to be this is one of your assignments. And the answer is, well, Dave, I don't really know yet. It's like, have a hypothesis. If I was to spend $500 a month starting tomorrow, what would I spend it on? What do I expect to get out of it? And then can I dial that in every month and improve it? Because what you're after is just improve, improve, improve. By the way, most of the Techstars companies, very first week, and this slide is the first week. This is like Tuesday of the first week. You're going to have to, in 3 months, you're going to want to pitch me on writing a check. If you have data, I will definitely be interested. If you have no data, probably not going to take the meeting. Because where we invest has to do with you need to de-risk it for me. I'm not going to be able to de-risk it for you. Okay? So breaking it down now on paid search, organic sales calls, these are the ones that you can actually control. So these are things that you can do at the top of the funnel. So if you don't know what you should be doing, totally up to you. These are just some of the variables at the top of the funnel. So as we go to marketing qualified leads, you're going to have a definition you need to define. So if somebody asks, hey, what's your definition of a marketing qualified lead? And the answer is, well, it's a list we bought from somebody else that, no. There's kind of standard definitions. You can find them. Literally, if you get HubSpot, they will help you walk through it. It's super easy. Don't go with the paid version yet. You have people who are suspects. We have customers, they look like this. In Boaz's world, he has a dealer network that could be buying this. But if he hasn't contacted them and they haven't shown interest, the answer is they're suspects. Prospects are, we've had some sort of interaction, they know who we are. And suspects are good, it gives you a list you can go after, but you can't, people blend these things together. And by the way, when you talk to an investor, this is one of those like huge gaffes. You're like, our customers say this. I'm like, wow, you have customers, that's awesome. Well, no, we don't actually have customers, there are prospects. Okay, so they're a customer when they actually part with cash. Until then, do not call them customers. They are prospects. So if you say, hey, we have customers, and then I come find out that you don't actually have anybody paying you for it, then I'm like, I wonder what else we've kind of rounded the edges on. So be very crisp on those things. Qualified prospects are people who are like, they meet the profile, they should be buyers. And then you have a handoff process to sales. You need to identify your steps to close. You may be able to do a one-call close. In Boaz's case, if you're doing an enterprise sale, it may be that you have to do a proposal. Again, this is where you have to qualify your sales process, but within the sales process, you need to identify that. And then you need to look at the number of calls to close is an estimate. That will help you determine time. So do they need to use it for 30 days before they get a proposal? Do you need to give them a proposal? So lead attribution is something I just want you to be cautious and aware of. Lead attribution is really important because you need to be able to look at it and say, where did that lead come from? So you can track that using Google Analytics. You can know what site they were on before your site. There's some technical setup you need to do in this. It's mostly mechanical, but you need to be aware of it because if you do a blended rate, you don't know where to spend money. And one of the things you're after in the next 4 months of tracking this data is you need to know where you're going to spend it and where your best guess is of where you get it back. And then look at your trending by source. So ultimately what you're after is, I want to know where to double down. So if somebody gives you the money and you say, hey, I want to know how to double down on this, the answer is, where are you going to put it? And it's okay not to know at the phase that you're at, but my push on you with all of these things is to have a hypothesis and have a position. This is like your customer profile that we've talked about in previous months. My customer profile is this. And the answer is, awesome, it's that until you find out that you're wrong. In which case, you're making an intelligent decision to talk about the customer profile. But it's not everybody, because we know it's not that. So you need to make a decision to like have a hypothesis and have a stand, and then use the data to figure out what works best, right? So that's kind of a marketing 101. Let me get into sales next. So sales is about capturing the value of what you've created. So how will they buy? So the good news about sales models is there's really a limited number of choices of what you can do. So web direct is somebody finds you, they place an order online, they place it on the web. It means that you have a low enough price point that it's fairly risk averse. Right? No one's going to buy a $250,000 contract for consulting over a web form, right? Well, maybe I could be in the wrong business. So web direct means generally fairly low price point, known business, known product, known commodity. Direct requires outbound sales, and by outbound it could be inside sales or outside sales. But the idea is somebody has to call and educate you and say, hey, this is what we do. Right? And I'm going to walk you through a sales process. So the value of that has to be high, and your sales cost for that is going to be high because somebody has to actually do the work. And if you don't count for your time, you have to replace you in your time. So the definition of a zombie startup, in my mind, having looked at a bunch of data now, is a startup that never scaled its sales effort past its CEO founder. And the worst part about being a zombie startup is you can't leave as a founder. So the definition of a zombie startup is one that has never scaled its sales effort past its founder or CEO. So if you're the lead salesperson and the only salesperson, you're like, well, we need to raise money to hire a salesperson. Ooh, like serious red flag. And the reason is not that the passionate, I like founders who sell, don't get me wrong. I love founders who sell because you stay close to your customer. The problem is if it never scales past you, you're like, then you've never either found the right sales process or you're kind of stuck. Because what's going to happen is you're going to get to a point where you're like, we can't raise money. Since we can't raise money, we can't hire a salesperson. Since we can't hire a salesperson, we can't raise money. And we're like, you're on your way to zombie land. And the problem is you probably have people at Thanksgiving that are going to be like, how's your startup doing? We invested. And you're like, Thanksgiving is really awkward, like when you can't scale, because it's a bad sign. And as a founder, you're like, I feel obligated to my shareholders and my investors, but we're not scaling. And it's a painful place to be. So don't, just note to self. Indirect or channel. So anybody used to work at Microsoft? Okay. So Microsoft was wholly dependent on, it's built an amazing channel to do fulfillment. So here's the deal about channels. Channels to fulfill the demand that you create, they do not create demand. So we were a services company in Microsoft's channel. We did services. Our primary business was delivering services. For every dollar Microsoft product we sold, we did $4 or $5 in service revenue to install it. You come along with a product, you're like, our product's better, nobody knows your product, and I have to decide to either sell the sales process I have today or introduce your new product early and risk my sales process. Not going to happen. So channels are awesome at fulfilling the demand you create. So anybody use Atlassian and Bitbucket? Okay. Atlassian has done an amazing job of developing a sales channel. They're fairly unique these days in doing so. But if you think a sales channel is the way you're going to sell, I would just question that from the get-go, because at a startup at scale, the answer is it's great. At launch, probably not going to work. The last one is retail, Best Buy, et cetera, and how you buy shelf space. And the answer is I don't know shit about that. So you need to get a better expert in that category than me, because it's hard. So here's the components of the business given the ones that I know. So WebDirect, known market, totally works for WebDirect, direct, and indirect. If you're an unknown market, how many of you are building a product that doesn't exist and no one knows about? All right. You're confined to the direct sales model because nobody knows nobody's looking for what you're doing. So the good news and bad news is nobody's looking. The good news is now you know how you're going to sell it. How many of you have a high price point? All right. If you're a high price point, or low, you're down to a direct model, because I can't transact and feel good about, am I going to get what's on my credit card? If it's a low price point, I can do web direct and I can do indirect. Known search words work in all of them. Unknown search words only work in direct. So if there's no high volume of traffic for the keywords that you're searching for, so think of it this way: if your potential customer, that is called jobs to be done, they're buying your product to fulfill a job to be done. And if they went to the Google search bar and searched for those keywords, what would they search for? You can use any one of the tools we outlined in the last few sessions. So by the way, they're in the previous slides, so I don't have to repeat it for the folks who are new. There's lots of tools to go look at keyword search and traffic, and you want to be able to look at it and say, great, I know I can actually buy that traffic. How much will it cost me to buy it? Or I can buy those Facebook leads. How much will it cost me to buy it? But those are your options. So you now get to pick which sales model you're going to use. Congratulations, we just narrowed the field for you. You don't have to play with them. Okay? So pick one. The strategy is who is going to do the work for sales. The tactics are, how are you going to do it? How many calls a day? What's the list? How are you going to get the list of people you need to do it? And what tools are you going to use to track it? At this point, I would recommend HubSpot. So having looked at a bunch of them, and we literally try to standardize for our portfolio companies, because we recognize every time you as a founder, CEO, take this on, it is brain damage. Because you're like, do we use Pipedrive? Do we use Salesforce? Do we use HubSpot? It is a pain. And Salesforce is great, and you can pay that toll at a later date. And it is a toll, right? But there's super simple solutions. There's lots of them. There's no right or wrong. If it works for you, use HubSpot. It's a simple plugin on Chrome extensions, so you can track and send emails out on a scheduled basis, and no commissions were granted in this recommendation. All right, business development. So business development is about the strategic relationships. BD has become a euphemism for sales because people don't like to say they're in sales. They'd rather say they're in business development. Corporate development means I'm trying to sell a company, by the way. But business development is really what strategic relationships should we have? What compelling offer can I make somebody who has that list of 5,000 people to sell my product? What's the joint venture? What's the commission? What's the revenue share? So a business development role has to do with what are the strategic partnerships I should be looking for and how do I get in front of them? By the way, it starts off with how do I make you money? It doesn't start off by I have an amazing product, right? I don't know about you guys, but well, in my world of VC, I get some really wacky things. Like, hey, it would be awesome if, and it's like, you have no idea what I do. You have you haven't taken the time to qualify the lead at all. So all you're doing is burning through what you think are leads. It's just bad. So the value starts with what's in it for them. And it has to sound enough compelling to say, yeah, I'd be happy to do it. My least favorite are the ones that come with a follow-up email that says, I emailed you last week and you haven't responded to me. And the answer is, because I don't give a shit. I just marked it as junk mail, right? So every once in a while, when I sneak through, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not going to respond to you now either. There's a weird human nature thing there that I'm obviously not afflicted by. But if you think it works, good luck. So your business development strategy is who is it you want to get in front of? What is your value proposition to them? And how do you make it easy for them to say yes? That's going to involve a risk reversal for the most part. How do you de-risk it for them? Not, hey, it would be really awesome for me if you sold my product. And the answer is, I'm sure that's true. And still not interested. So have somebody else read it, like your spouse or somebody else who's like, I don't know what you're saying here. Like, I know what you're asking for, but it doesn't make any sense. So your business development effort is how do you do that? Now, the question for business development is, who should you get as a partner? What's the list? Who's going to do this work? Is it going to be you as the CEO and founder? Somebody on your team? What are the tactics? What's the messaging, the value proposition? And again, what are your tools to track? If you do it in HubSpot, you can literally set it up as a type. So I'll go in and go, I've got a type and I've got other VCs, I've got limited partners, I've got target investments, I've got a list of things that it's just a checkbox, right? But what I'm doing with that list is I'm building out a list of profiles that I'm going to like check, 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 and it takes me 5-6 seconds to put in a new contact. So I'm like, email, add new contact, add type, right? And then I categorize them all by type and I send them all email in HubSpot. So if you get an email from me that looks like that, that's exactly why. And by the way, you can do templates with an email within HubSpot as well. So all the recurring templates of your cut and paste stuff that drives you batshit crazy, super already done for you in HubSpot. When somebody opens it, you know that they opened it. So all of those tools are useful. So, all right, let's talk about pricing. Last section, then we're going to get to the revenue models. So from a pricing standpoint, pricing's a little more art than science at the early days, but I at least want to give you a place to start. So if you look at your competitive product offering, what is the market range for what you should be charging for your product or service? And what you need to do is map this out as part of the research. If you didn't do the research session, go back and do notes from session 1 and come back and say, it looks like the product range looks to be here. So one of the companies I was looking at recently, I was talking with, this is a potential investment, and it's like their annual contract value is $24,000. When I look at their market in general, it looks like they're competitively, they're probably $60,000. And I'm like, it looks like your price is low. And they're like, yeah, we think it's kind of low too. I'm like, okay. So if that would be, that's like, I'm going to keep following them, but I'm kind of waiting for them to like move the price up and see what happens because it impacts their dramatic year-end result, right? So what are the benchmarks? Because there's general feels if you look at what's going on in the market in your product category, and you're like, well, these guys are going to die because they're free and they're not capturing any value for the value they've created. So know what the benchmarks are. As I talked about earlier, do not start too low because you can always lower it. You cannot raise it. So,
Why do you say you can't raise it?
So once it gets out in the market, so there's lots of ways to A/B test pricing. But in general, if you're known as the low price leader versus the premium, like, oh, I bought that product too, but it was a blah. So if you're selling B2B in particular, it's called marketing managers, and somebody goes from one company to another company and they want to take your tool with them, and you started off super low and now you're higher, it's easier to negotiate a first-time discount, right? Or so it's a $25,000 a year product, but for our first 10 customers, we're going to sell it for 15. Sounds a lot better than it's 15, but then we went to 25. So it's about what position you want to have in the customer's mind. So I was talking with an investment we're looking at today, and they just came to the end of contract and bumped customer prices by 7x, and I'm like, ooh. And they're like, but nobody really complained. I'm like, huh, you were probably just way underpriced. Right? And the answer was, yeah, we think we were. And it's like, oh, okay. So you don't want to, we had one contract with one big customer that we were looking at. They're like, they wanted us to guarantee that we weren't going to do more than 5x our price in the second year. And it's like, okay, what does that tell you about where our price is today? We're fine if you don't do more than 5x. I'm like, oh my God, right? So don't start too low. This is a question of like, you have to be willing to face the firing squad and say, this is our price. So a couple quick notes on making that easy. Put it in print. So if you put it on a one-pager and you do a PDF and it's in print, people don't really negotiate with you. It's kind of weird. But if you sound kind of wishy-washy when you're on the phone with them, they'll be like, how about I give you $1? And you're like, $1 sounds great. Right? But if you put it in print and do some design and have it look like it's official, people will be like, oh, that's their price. Right? And by the way, you can A/B test the shit out of that. Right? So you don't publish your price under pricing. You create a landing page. It's called a squeeze page. The only thing you do on a squeeze page is buy. Or they have to type in the URL or shorten their URL. So let's take dkparker.com/price1. Now, I'm not going to do a price 2 because I don't want somebody to do that obvious. I may do price A. But I'm going to take my traffic from Facebook ads and I'm going to send it to Unbounce. And when I go to Unbounce, I'm going to send it to 2 different pages. And it's going to A/B test it for me. I'm going to test headline, I'm going to test body copy, and I'm going to test price. And the subscription to Unbounce, I think it's free for 60 days. So if you do it, make sure you get as many tests as you can before that, right? Or it's going to cost you 25 or 50 bucks a month. It's still cheap. So what you're going to do then is you're going to buy the traffic and you're send it to landing pages. You're going to test A/B test because we all have opinions as founders. That opinion is not based on data, generally. It's based on passion. Passion's important, not adequate for the job, but passion's important. So, but A/B test it. And what you're after with the A/B testing is I'm going to buy traffic. Unbounce is going to A/B test it for me. So you don't have to track it. And then they're going to start just sending traffic to the right pages. So the next time I'm going to test A/B test, and I'm just going to test price point. I'm going to test it up. I want to see how far I can go up. And when people quit checking out, and by the way, you can do this without actually having a product to sell. Will you disappoint some people? Yes, but what will you learn? So I can tell you from previous experience that I had a thesis on a product I wanted to test. I made the product pages look like they were genuine product pages. I took people through to the point where I'm like, ready to buy, and put your credit card information on. As soon as the credit card information came up, I gave them a 404 error. Oh, I'm sorry, it's broken. Or, hey, we're in beta, we're not ready to take your order right now. But I want to know how many people got through to the credit card page. So they A/B tested it, I bought traffic, I figured out which price. They got to the point where they could buy, and they couldn't place the order. But what did I learn? I learned a lot about how much does it cost me to buy the traffic, of the traffic, what percent converted, of the people that converted, what percent got through the credit card page. So you can do that for a few $100s in design and Unbounce. You don't even have to have the product done. So, and I would encourage you to do that. And people are like, oh, but our customers will be disappointed. By the way, with your MVP, your customers will be disappointed. Like, if you wait for your customers not to be disappointed, you shipped way too late. And it's a hard thing to get over, but it's like, that's just the name of the game. All right, last component on cost-based versus value-based pricing. So they are buying your product for what's defined as a job to be done. What is the job to be done? The job to be done is there's a person and they're doing this super redundant task. You're like, okay, my value basis is the cost of replacing a person. So how do I make that a compelling offer, right? So think of it as in terms of not like, oh, this is how much it cost me to build it, or this is how much, like, what is the job to be done and what's the value of that job to be done? If you're creating value, then the question is, what can you capture value for? And then as you start to do your financial modeling, we'll get into this next month from a financial model perspective. And by the way, all the templates that I've already built for you, if you're around next month, you'll just get all the templates as well, because there's nothing worse than looking at a blank cursor on a spreadsheet. When you have to do a 3 or 4 year pro forma, it's painful. And the templates are already done, so you'll get a good jump start on that. So you're gonna end up with my pricing estimate. I'm gonna have a product 1 and a product 2, and you're gonna have your hypothesis of what your price is. That is a number that goes into a cell on a spreadsheet, which means you can't do the hand-wavy founder thing. Well, what's the price of it? Well, kind of depends. Like, no, it doesn't. There's a number in a cell that you have to put a number. So you have to pick something. And if you pick it, then you can model out what we make or not make based on what pricing is available. Okay? It's a little more art than science. We'll talk more about it as we get into financial models as well. But that's a good place to start. All right, revenue models. I will apologize in advance because I'm super geeky about this stuff because I've spent way too much time looking at it, which is probably a bad sign. The history on this, and Carson's been working on cleaning up the data, so we're getting ready to publish some reports on it. So 5, 6 years ago, somebody said, hey, can I have your financial model? I'm like, well, yours is a marketplace, mine's a subscription. If theirs are different, you'll take my model and you'll break it and you want me to fix it, so no. So the question was, well, how many templates do you really need to make? And come to find out, the answer is there's 14. 15 if you include services. So some of you are in the services business. We'll talk more about that one as well. But in general, there's 14 tech-related revenue models. They have varying levels of complexity. Some of them you can hurt yourself. So don't do these. Those ones are not for amateurs. It's like advertising or big data. In order to monetize big data, you actually have to have the data. Right? So we have one of our portfolio companies we're pivoting to the big data model. I'm like, how long is that going to take? And they're like, we think it could take 18 months. I'm like, how are you going to fund yourself for the 18 months? And they're like, oh, that's a really great question. Because you have to have the data to actually monetize it. You can't monetize your aspiration unless you're Theranos, and then you can monetize just about anything. All right. So what are the revenue models? So you have the business model versus revenue we talked about a little bit, but if you think about revenue models, it's a component of the business model. It's a framework for how revenue pricing and who pays. And these all lean towards tech and product related. So if you're service related, I've included it at the very start, but we can talk about those specifically to those two. All right, first thing is fee for service. So if you think about this from a B2B, if you do a 4-quadrant box, you've got business to business, business to consumer, product and services. So a B2B product or a B2B service. A B2B service is consulting. So a business to consumer service is the place you get your hair cut, right? A B2B product is Salesforce. A B2C product is Snapchat or King's and what's the Candy Crush? I was thinking of Z2 Live and I'm like, that's not the game I'm thinking of. So within gaming, that's business to consumer product. So ultimately, you fit into one of those 4 categories. Investors, when you meet with them, are like, are you like this thing or like that thing? So if you wait for me to decide what box you belong into, you're taking a risk that I may put you in a box that you don't want to be in. I wouldn't do that. I would just be like, oh, we sell business to business products or we sell business to business services. Just fill in the gaps for me. So fee for service, consulting, haircut, these are all services where people are required to deliver your product or service. And the reason I say product is you can productize a service that people are in the back end doing that. So this building, this law firm, productizes a service, right? So we do legal. You don't really get into the fine level of details of what paralegal did what thing, unless you really dig into the bill, which I think you should. But just know that this is a services business. It scales only with people. A product business can scale when you sleep. I like product businesses because they can disproportionately scale. So if you're not in the product business, no worries, right? But be aware that you should think about how do we take the service we're doing and turn it into a product. Dan, I think you were around for Anna Stephanie's company, LeaveLogic. So they were a services company that came through Next. They basically help people with personal or family leave for big enterprises. They originally were a consulting company. So we pushed them in the direction of, well, how do you turn that into a product and scale it in such a way so that people can come in and subscribe to it and do that. And they I don't know if you saw that they sold 6 months ago, which was awesome. So the idea there is, can you take, even if it's a service, can you turn it into a more scalable product? And in the back of that, can you lower the cost of delivering that through a combination of tools and technology? So that revenue model is called product as a service. Because what you're after there is, I'm moving the service, but I'm really scaling it into a product. So I would encourage you to think, if you're in the service business today, look for opportunities to do that, just because if you're going to sell a company, just a quick highlight for it, and some of you have heard me say this before, if you're going to sell a services company, it will in general sell for 0.75 to 1.5x revenue. So if you're doing $1 million a year in revenue, it will sell for 0.75 to 1.5. So $750,000 to $1.5 million, depending on the profitability of the business. If you're doing $1 million in product sales, that company is going to sell between 6 and 8 times revenue. So if it takes the same amount of time to build a product company as it does to build a service company, and the multiple is 6 to 8 times higher, I would encourage you to think about that as an option before you do it, rather than after. Because if you do it afterwards, you're like, that was a lot of work. And the answer is, you're right. It was a lot of work. So, but if you build a product company with recurring revenue, your multiples are always going to be higher. So as an investor, we like scalable product companies because you don't have to be there to deliver it. So your key metrics on fee for service are project revenue, cost of delivering that, which is usually time, could be yours, could be somebody else's, equals then what's gross margin. And then ultimately, can you scale those projects on a higher demand? Anybody in services businesses? Yeah? Okay. So services business are good. Try to push them into productize a service. All right, next model is commerce. And again, you're going to have this list. You're going to go through this list over the next 30 days and figure out which one you're going to pick in B2B or B2C. Amazon Supply, great examples of commerce. I'm taking a product, I'm selling that product. My unit economics or key metrics are, what's my wholesale or cost of the goods sold? What's my average margin? And what's my average basket? So now I know what I'm going to make as a gross margin on an average transaction. So commerce are typically physical goods, could be wholesale, could be retail. This can mature into a marketplace, but it typically starts off with just commerce, we're just selling a product. In Amazon's world, and one of the things I would encourage you to think about is, at launch, Amazon had one revenue model. Today, Amazon has dozens of revenue models. And the luxury of scale is, if you have scale, you can have lots of revenue models. If you mess up on the first one, you will never get to scale. And as founders, our delusion, and by the way, I'm right here with you, right? As founders, our delusion is we see the business at scale even though it's at launch. So we tend to delude ourselves into, this stuff doesn't apply to me because I'm thinking of the business at scale. And the answer is you won't be able to raise money at it, and you'll likely die in the process, or the company will, hopefully not you. That's important. So next business, subscription. How many of you are thinking about a subscription model? Awesome, subscription models are great. They works in both business to business and business to consumer. Your key metrics here is going to be your monthly recurring revenue or annual contract value, ACV, MRR, your conversion ratio, for example, how many people do a trial. Of the people who do a trial, how many convert to paid, less churn. That gives you your kind of truest numbers. Monthly recurring revenue is the truest number of a subscription model. You run into booked revenue, invoice revenue, cash received. Those are mostly accounting things except for the cash. So when you're a startup, the answer is, if somebody says, I would like to pay a year in advance, the answer is yes. Now, accounting GAAP terms will take that money and expand it across 12 months as far as how we recognize the revenue, but cash is cash. And if you can't buy lunch for your team with equity, or pay salaries. So take the cash. So people are like, well, I'd like to be, no, take the cash. So the examples there are Salesforce, Box, and Spotify. The challenges is for business to business, MVP may not be enough. You may need a kick-ass product. Kevin can talk with you more about that one because there's some tough markets there. In all of these cases, what you're after from a forecast and a revenue standpoint, if you put all these pieces, marketing, sales pieces, and revenue models together, the more predictable and forecastable your revenue is, let me repeat that, the more predictable and forecastable your revenue is, the easier it will be for you to raise cash to grow the business. So if you bring me a plan, and then you call me 3 months later, and I happen to dust off the plan on my desk, it's all electronics, it's just electronic dust, and I pull up your plan, I'm like, hey, you said you were going to be at this revenue at this month. Where are you? And you're like, well, that plan was really mitigated on the fact that you needed to give us money. So rookie flag goes up, right? So Excel spreadsheet, rookie flag goes up. This was based on us we had to give you money. So now you're in the 80%-ish who totally miscalculated that. So if the answer is, oh yeah, actually, we're about 114% of plan, the answer is, oh, really? I'm super interested. Because now you're in the 5 or 10% of people that not just weren't dependent on me giving you money, but actually went and go crush the plan without it, and you're plus or minus like the plan with a level of accuracy. 114% is fairly accurate, right? You're like, we're at 114% of plan. The likelihood of you having a predictable and forecastable revenue model, pretty interesting. The answer is, oh yeah, well that was kind of Rev 6 of the plan, and we're on Rev 9 of the plan, and we changed the forecast again, and I'm like, nope. Right? And you're going to call back 3 months later, and I'm going to ask you the same question. How are you against your plan? If you're in the 5 to 10% of people are like, hey, yeah, actually, we're above plan. But forecastability means not like we're not way above plan because we sandbagged it, but we're way below plan. So, yeah.
Question. I'm hearing a lot that customers, quality customers, is far more value than revenue. And forecasting can do this. How do you view a customer and quality customer versus hitting those revenue projections?
Yes, and both. So the question was quality of customer versus revenue. So there's one revenue model. I've listed as revenue, it's kind of a misnomer. If you're doing, are you B2C or B2B?
B2B.
B2B. So typically what people mean when they say that is, how many logos do you have on your website? Are they big logos or not? And the answer is, I still want to know that they're willing to pay for the service that you're offering. And what's the forecast of that revenue? Is it tied to what's our product release? What's the forecast? What I'm after again is I'm moving you out of there's a bucket called risk capital, and there's a bucket called growth capital. The more you know about the data of how your customer buys, the more you move towards that bucket. The more you move towards that bucket, I'm just saying, how do I give you cash to fuel your growth, not cash to like, is the product work or not? So I would contest that it's both, not an either or. Because if you have quality logos but they're not willing to pay for it, I would go, I don't really believe that the system's super valuable. But if you have quality logos and they're paying for it, the answer is, yeah, it's super interesting. But it's not really one or the other. So, okay, subscription. Next one is productize a service. I talked briefly about this. This is how you can take a service. So for example, Moz, everybody know Moz here locally if you don't, worth looking at. Moz was originally a services company that did consulting, that built tools. And they finally got to a point where they're like, we're getting rid of the services business, we're just gonna sell the tools. And they literally sold the services business off. Like one of their internal folks bought it, became a separate business, and they just wanted the tools business. That's generally pretty rare. And the reason it's rare is because when you're running a services business and you have 35 to 50% gross margins and you have predictable revenue based on the number of contracts you have outstanding, it's hard to wean yourself off of that cash flow. So most companies don't. You find a lot of spin outs, but then you have a question of split, like focus on how much I'm focused on the services business versus the product business. As an investor, I don't mind combination business models, I actually like them, But if the answer is you could flip back and forth the services, I want to know that you're actually going to scale the product side and that you're going to use tools to drive the cost out of the business. And what usually happens in the product as a service where you have a services business parallel is some of your best people have to go to your biggest customer and then they don't work on the core product. So it brings a level of hesitation as an investor because I'm like, I don't know if you're going to shift people around or like how much of the budget's going to go that direction. So productized service is a good one. It's easier to bootstrap than some of the others because you can get service revenue in the door and that service revenue is profitable service revenue. All right, next one, transaction fees and rentals. Elance, Chug, 99 Designs, Kickstarter. So there's a project, it has an average transaction value. There's a percentage fee for the service. By the way, almost all of those are never lower than 15%. So if you're like, we're going out at 5%, I'd be like, not gonna be around long. So almost all of these have greater, 15% or greater. The rental business model is the same economics. They're positioned differently, but basically it's the same. What's my percent of the transaction? How many number of transactions am I gonna run on a monthly basis? The challenge here is that if your margins are small, you need to be super efficient. And because it's hard to, again, if you start at 5%, you build a community, it's hard to move to 15% after you build a community. Talk to Upwork. Because they were Odesk and Elance, and they merged together to form Upwork, and at one point they had to go back and systematically raise their percentages across all of their channel. And they had a fairly major mutiny that they survived ultimately, but it was a tough go. So transaction fees and rentals, super interesting business. Again, it has to do with how many transactions you're gonna do. Lead generation, anybody thinking about lead generation as a model? Okay, so lead gen, quick version of lead gen is Mint, All-Star Directories, NetQuote are all in the business of lead generation. We give you something for free. We take your information and either sell it to or monetize in the form of like credit card leads. So creditcards.com, lead generation model. These tend to be lean towards companies. So if you look at the list of Google ad spend around keywords, there's a cascading list that starts with like, you guys know mesothelioma, right? So that's the most expensive ad word out there. So the reason is because those people will buy those leads and then turn around and sell it to lawyers that's a lead gen. They tend to follow the Google AdWords spend. Life insurance, auto insurance, mortgages, cascading down. It's super competitive. So if you take All-Star Directories was a education referral site based here in Seattle. At one point it was doing about 80 million in revenue. Highly competitive because everybody else can figure out how they get leads cheaper than you get leads. And now you have competitors at every turn. So it's a good business to start in, but just the quick note there at the bottom is the average traffic conversion is 0.06. So you better be damn efficient at it. But you could bootstrap it. You don't need to raise outside capital for it. Gaming, anybody can do gaming? We start getting obscure fairly quickly. I'm going to roll through the rest of these without a level of detail. So gaming is an interesting example. Candy Crush and King. Z2 sold to Candy Crush for $160 million. This is only business to consumer. The metrics are downloads, percentage of people who play it, average in-app purchase, and 21-day use case is your predictor of success, period. Kind of a wacky one, but you know, the folks that know in gaming are like, that's it. It's 21 days. If you still use it in 21 days, we have you. If you're not using it in 21 days, you mean nothing to me. You're a customer I paid for that went away. So let's crank through the rest of these, and we're going to come back to some Q&A around which one you're going to pick. Marketplaces. Anybody looking at marketplace? Buy side, sell side? No marketplaces? Wow, one marketplace. Okay, let me talk to marketplaces for a minute. So eBay, Alibaba, great examples of marketplaces. They work in both business to business and business to consumer. There are two funds in the Northwest, one in BC and one in Seattle, that only invest in marketplaces. The reason they invest in marketplaces is there's an intrinsic moat that you build, but it goes slowly, right? I have to have buyers, I have to have sellers, I have to have buyers. So my key metrics are what's my average transaction amount, number of transactions per month, and the commission that I make as part of that transaction. Now keep in mind that original funnel chart we have, you now have two. You have a funnel for buyers and you have a funnel for sellers. I have a cost of customer acquisition for buyers and a CAC for sellers. I have an LTV for buyers and an LTV for sellers. So your level of complexity went up. However, if you build a marketplace, it's really hard for me to go attack your marketplace because you already have both buyers and sellers. So yeah.
Are these share economies?
Share economies, yeah, they're pretty much start off with marketplaces. So all of them were originally marketplaces connecting buyers and sellers together. Most of the share economies then add transaction fees on top of it. So there's additional transaction fee because you're charging one side or another. The difference is the good in a share economy is typically a service versus a product. So, okay, other questions about marketplaces? Critical mass is super important, super risky. One company in BC who invests, one company in Seattle who invests. We like marketplaces as well if you nail it, but it's super hard to nail. It takes a level of maturity as the business grows. It's not easy to find early indications of success. Advertising search. Anybody think about advertising and search? Anybody have more than 1 million uniques on their site every month? Yay, you're not thinking about one that will hurt you. So Google and Facebook use advertising search. The key metrics are easy. The volume of traffic is hard. So when somebody says, oh, we're going to monetize this versus via advertising, I'm like, really, you have 1 million uniques? They're like, well, no. I'm like, well, then you're not going to monetize that via advertising anytime soon. So new media. This is the ultimate pixie dust revenue model, just so you know. Snapchat and WhatsApp have intrinsic network effects. In order for this app to be useful for me, I have to get you and you and you and you to use it, which gives me what's called a K-factor. K-factor is a viral coefficient. The viral coefficient is a math equation that I blogged about that is easy to calculate. So I was on the board at Classmates.com when we sold it. Our K-factor was for every customer we bought, he would introduce us to 2.2 people who would become customers. Not referrals, actually register and become customer. If your K-factor is less than 2, then I have to keep buying and buying and buying and buying and buying customers. If my K-factor is greater than 2, oh my God, it's amazing. So WhatsApp, great example. Pinterest, great example. K-factors of 3.5, K-factor of nearly 4. If you have a K-factor, and this is your revenue model, and you actually have K-factor, writing a check is not really a problem. Now, you have to get to a minimum number of subscribers so that you can monetize via the previous one, which is advertising. Ultimately, Twitter, Pinterest, etc., all about advertising. But the viral coefficient is your this is your critical metrics. So when somebody says, so how are you going to grow the business? We're going to go viral. This is what they mean. The percentage of people who can do it is super small, like crazy small. But if you do it, it's pretty amazing, and you'll find money.
That's what's happening with Fortnite right now, Dave?
Yeah, Fortnite is a game that has a lot of viral coefficient as far as how they bring on buyers. Then it monetizes more by the gaming economic, but they have a combination of both, which is the thing that makes it absolutely blockbuster. So the things that make investors, like Twitch is a great example, right? So Twitch has an intrinsic, everybody know Twitch? Anybody not know Twitch? Okay, so Twitch is, Amazon bought them 4 years ago, for $1 billion. Nothing. Twitch is where people watch other people play video games, right? If you don't have teenage kids or slightly older, you probably don't know. They get paid on a number of subscribers. They get gifted in donations. It is a freakishly amazing economy. But it has its basis in new media, which is I can calculate the number of subscribers I'm going to get, and then I'm going to monetize via a number of factors. So we invested in a company here in town that came out of Techstars that is actually monetizing how you do Twitch. So it's the back end of how do we figure out who gets paid for what thing and who buys what skin and who gets to donate to what thing. Really interesting company. So. But again, it's nuts, and we tend to stick to business, and they're building pitchforks and axes in that new economy, right? So, but yeah, that's what makes the compounding factor of both K-factor as well as gaming mechanics. The margins on virtual goods are pretty amazing. Like once I build a sword, my cost on that second sword is pretty low, just saying. All right, combinations. So combinations of, for example, subscription plus transaction fees, subscription plus services are all good things that you should consider because the companies mature at a much faster rate if they have more than one revenue model. Your exercise for this month is just to pick one. You can pivot to a different one. Here's the risk. So I was meeting with a company a few months ago and they're like, we are building a new product. So we're trying to find product market fit and we're innovating a new revenue model. And I'm like, oh my God, no. Like you took what was already risky, which was finding product market fit for a new product, and then you're gonna create a new revenue model? Like the compounding effect of risk makes it just nauseatingly high. And I'm like, just don't, like pick one. I don't care which one you pick. Like I'm not emotionally attached to any of these. Just pick one, but don't go create your own. So in the 5-year span that I've been watching this space, there's been 2 new revenue models. One was at the beginning of the process, it was Groupon. By the way, they pivoted to commerce plus lead gen is the revenue model. And the other one was this one, coins and tokens. Jury's still out. Now, if you got out and you went public, the answer is it was amazing. I have a lawyer friend I was talking to last night, and he's like, I had a chance to do a couple of those. I'm really glad I didn't because we'll have to see. Coins and tokens might be amazing. Maybe not. The SEC doesn't think so much. So we'll have to watch this one and see what ultimately happens. But I think Ripple's doing a really amazing job, but I don't know that I invest in coins or tokens.
Is Groupon no longer a business model?
Groupon's business model pivoted to...
But there were like a zillion Groupon copycats, right?
Yeah, so here's what's interesting about revenue models. So remember when Google got sued by Yahoo? Anybody remember that back that far in internet days? So Google got sued by Yahoo because Yahoo had bought a company who had a patent on pay-per-click advertising. So they patented a revenue model. You look at Groupon as an example of the modern day version of that. The answer is revenue models are freakishly hard to patent. So what happened when Groupon happened is there was 1,000 competitors, just like Groupon, only better, because you can't patent a revenue model. And once a revenue model's out there, it's super easy to copy because it's pretty transparent. So they launched with a revenue model that was unique and ultimately pivoted into commerce, right, which is we sell stuff and make margin, and lead gen, which is we create customers and you pay us for new customers. That ultimately was their converted revenue model. So
But all those other guys are still
dead.
okay.
Living Social is gone. I can't even think of any. And literally, there was thousands. I can't tell you how many we must have saw. Dan and I were hanging out at the same time together. You're like, oh, it's just another Groupon, only better. All right, let me give you the 3 that could cost you your enterprise and your house. So multi-sided marketplaces. Yeah.
Quick question. Is there any indication if subscription models are getting tired more now?
Subscription models, I think, are at the peak of where I see a lot of stuff that maybe shouldn't be a subscription that's actually turned into a subscription.
Right.
The thing that people like about it is from an exit multiple perspective, the enterprise value on a monthly recurring business that is the best exit multiple you can get in the enterprise value calculation. So you end up with some stuff that you're like, I'm not really sure that's a subscription, but they've converted it into a subscription. In some ways, it's the truest form of revenue calculation. Because if you can leave every month, or even if you can't, it's annual contracts, you still have an MRR calculation that says, is that MRR going up or going down? They're not going away anytime soon, for sure.
From a business perspective, I totally understand. From a user perspective, though, like everything becomes a subscription. You start actually seeing all those plugs into your wallet, just ripping money out, right?
Yep.
So just from a user perspective, it's like I'm getting tired of subscriptions.
Yeah, no, I clear them out about every year, especially when I look at the recurring ones. I'm like, what was that one before? It's kind of like looking at my iPhone where I'm like, there's an app there, I have no idea what it does. Like, that happens a lot. But the ones that hit my credit card every month, I definitely see. Yeah.
Just going back to new media.
Yeah.
Snapchat was in there.
Yep.
So I noticed they sold part of the company for about 250 million this week.
Yep.
The K factor didn't quite get. How's Snapchat making money?
So ultimately what they're doing is trying to monetize based on the advertising model. So that's the way they're going to monetize. The way they track, though, as far as customer growth is the K-factor tracking. But they've already gone public. So the secondary market they did on the 250 was, I'm not sure exactly what, it seemed like a very strange number because they had already gone public for however many billions of dollars.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a,
And I'm still waiting for mine.
there's some of those that you're like, as long as that trajectory of growth stays the same, you can raise money against it. If the trajectory of growth starts to top off, the question is, where does it start to top off, right? So but like I said, with Classmates we saw it, with Pinterest you saw it, with WhatsApp, but there's some tough ones in there. So these are 3 that could hurt you, and 1 that's virtually dead. So multi-sided marketplaces, B2B2C, multi-sided marketplaces, you have to get so many things right, the risk factor is crazy high. Big data, I talked about a little bit earlier. Patients Like Me is an amazing company. They've anonymized patient data that allows big pharma companies to track against all of those things. You have to have a massive data set to monetize that, which means you either need to get the data set from the university and whoever built it, or you have to start building yours, but it's going to take you 18 to 24 months to build it. Panels, I like panels. Taluna is a really interesting company. If you wanted to pull 1,500 IT leaders about a product you want to do, they would do that for a fee. And they have a panel of 1,500 IT or 1,500 CEOs or 1,800 this or 1,950 that, and they'll do that for you for a fee. But they have these massive panels. You have to have the panel before you can monetize it. And for most of us, you have to have, again, at scale it works, but at launch it's super tough. So these are ones you should avoid to not hurt yourself at launch. The last one is, interestingly enough, the old Microsoft model, licensing. Perpetual licensing of software. Virtually dead now, other than big enterprise software like Oracle and stuff like that. But other than that, everything's moved to subscription. So it's still there. We see it every once in a while, very rarely. Where you think back 10 years ago, if you read the notes from 10 years ago about Microsoft wants to convert from the perpetual license to a subscription, everybody's like, I don't know if it'll work. And then you look back and you're like, how many of you get a Microsoft charge every month for $10.95 for Office 365? The answer is a lot of us. So, all right. So in summary, here they are all on one page. In the next 30 days, this will be part of your deliverables for next month, is just pick one. And again, I don't care which one you pick. So there are ones that are easier and ones that are harder. But you should start with your hypothesis with this, then go to your hypothesis for marketing and go, here's my conversion metrics, here's the numbers. Doing that is the easiest place to start for your pro forma financial model, which we'll talk about next month. Because when you have a hypothesis and when you have some marketing metrics, you can actually just pick that data and put it into your financial model versus like, I think we're going to create a new one. The answer is, don't do that. It'll be so much easier. So anybody already picked their revenue model and they're like, this is easy, I'm going to go with subscription? Or anybody have questions? Yeah, go. Yes, you picked one? Awesome, okay. Questions about revenue models? Lots to think about? Okay. Yeah, no, okay.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah. All right, so the next 30 days from a deliverable standpoint, again, you'll get a copy of this tomorrow. Your deliverables, there's a list of resources. This will be all on the website tonight. All the business models are broken down. I need to update this promo code. So when I'm going to shift this to next month. So don't do the financial model yet. The reason is because if you do this other data first, then the financial model is a lot easier. If you don't pick the revenue model first, then it makes it really hard to do a financial model because you're like, I don't know how they're going to convert. So marketing funnel breakdown, all the stuff from tonight will be on your list. Your month 4 deliverables will be on the website as well. You're going to do your marketing hypothesis, and you're going to start to do some actual testing. So if I was to spend $100, which you will spend, where would I spend it? How would I drive A/B testing to a landing page? So one of the blog posts I will point to is a step-by-step guide to how you're going to do A/B testing. So you can go create it yourself, or you can just read the blog and buy Unbounce. And like I said, I think the first 60 days is free. You're going to then go back to Lean Canvas. If you haven't signed up for that yet, please do it. It's in last month's things. You're going to update your customer segment, the problem, and unique value proposition. And you're going to add revenue streams and channels. If you haven't seen Lean Canvas yet, it'll become obvious when you see it. It basically is in box format. You're going to use to do that. And you're doing more customer development interviews. You never stop doing customer development interviews. The difference is now is you can go out with them with more of conviction and say, and this is our price. And then you want to watch their pupils, right? Do they dilate or not? Was it meh or not? But for those of you who weren't with us the very first session, we used the rubric and you all judged your business based on the rubric. If you haven't done that yet, go back to 1 and you're going to get the 10 factors that investors will look at your business. If one of them scores a 2, you know you need to get it up to a 3. So all of these are parts of those 10 factors that we're just building on every month. Make sense? So that's what you're going to work on this next month.